Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy Daily News Analysis. Today is 13th November 2025 and today we have some important topics from different newspapers. So this is the list of topics for today and one by one we'll be discussing all these important topics, and without any further delay let's get into the discussion and let's understand the first very important topic. And this editorial has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view this is very important for General Studies paper 3, and you can also go through the syllabus as well, right? So let's understand the context of this editorial first. The context is that recently Google has established the largest artificial intelligence data center in the state of Andhra Pradesh. However, the author described that this investment from Google in the state of Andhra Pradesh as a defining moment in India's evolving economic landscape. Now we'll understand why author called it as a defining momentum in India's evolving economic landscape. Now in fact, the celebrations in Visakhapatnam and the envy neighboring states, for example Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Telangana. So all these states are neighboring states, and these states are also competing for attracting more and more investment from different players, different private players, right? So therefore they actually revealed the emergence of a new kind of a federalism. So we already knew that this kind of a federalism is known as competitive federalism, where states have been competing with one another for attracting investment, and this is what has been happening in the southern states. So southern states have been competing to attract investments from the global players and other private players domestically, right? So across India, chief ministers are no longer queuing in Delhi for patronage. Now before 1991 reforms, what used to happen? So most of the funds for the state governments, so planning commission used to provide funding for the state governments. So now chief ministers are not actually dependent on Delhi for funding or for the investments. They are now in boardrooms with the global summits, right? So they're conducting global investment summits and they are in boardrooms with the investors, trying to attract as many investors as possible, trying to attract as many investments as possible to their respective states, right? So in fact, they have been competing for the investments through performance, efficiency, policy innovation, infrastructure development, skill development. So through these interventions, what they have been doing, they have been competing for attracting investments from the global players and also the domestic players as well. However, in this fiscal federalism or competitive federalism, you can actually see a shift that has been emerging. The shift from the central dependence of states during earlier times to state level competition. Now state governments have been visibly competing with each other to attract investments from different private players, right? So there's a competition on the part of different states, and the states have been trying to perform better, trying to increase their efficiency, trying to invest in skill development, trying to invest in infrastructure development and policy innovation. They are coming up with new industrial policies to attract investors. They're creating land banks so that the investors can come and invest in states, right? So therefore there is a profound transformation and shift that you could observe here. So earlier state used to depend on the central government for the funding, but now state governments are trying to attract the investors from different parts of the world, right? So therefore you can see that there is a visible and profound transformation in India's governance and growth model as well. And apart from that, you can also go through the number of states in this image, and those states which have been attracting the highest amount of FDIs and those states which are attracting the least amount of FDIs as well, so that we get to know the trends of states competing for the FDI. Now let's understand this transformation from central patronage to the state initiative, because attracting investments is a state initiative. They're no longer dependent on the center. For example, a state government has been facilitating investments, and the state governments are also creating summits, global investment summits, to attract the investments on a large scale. So for decades after independence, New Delhi controlled the economic destiny of the nation, right? So for several decades immediately after independence, from 1990s till 1990s, the central government has mostly controlled the economic destiny of the entire nation, including the states as well. Right? So till 1991, what sort of an economic system we have? The economic system which was controlled by the state. Now, in that particular economic system, which was heavily controlled, heavily regulated by the state, the system of licenses, permit system, quotas, so they ensured that decisions about what industries could operate and where were made by the central bureaucrats. So there was excessive bureaucratization, excessive regulation, private sector was not allowed, the foreign direct investment was also not allowed. So most of these sectors are controlled and regulated by the state itself. And there was a heavy bureaucratization as well, and this was the scenarios during till 1990s, right from India's independence. However, states competed not for the entrepreneurs but for the goodwill of the ministers in the central government, right? So they wanted entrepreneurs, and at the same time they also wanted the goodwill of the ministers of the central government. So the 1991 liberalization, so it reforms fundamentally altered this equation. Now this is very simple. So this has been saying us that earlier the state governments have been excessively dependent on the union government for the funding, for the investment, for entrepreneurs. But now, after 1991 economic reforms, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization, which is also called as LPG reforms. After LPG reforms, the state governments have been competing among themselves to attract investments on a large scales to each of these states. I hope it is clear. Now, in fact, the dismantling of industrial licensing. So with the 1991 economic reforms itself, as part of the LPG reforms, the central government started liberalizing the economy, reducing the restrictions, regulations. So the government has also dismantled the industrial licensing and opened the economy for the global trade as well. So for example, now India now have a huge amount of forex reserves, and India is also exporting a wide variety of goods to other countries as well. So earlier Indian economy was an inward looking economy, right? So it is known as inward looking economy. So India's balance of payments were also not up to the optimal level. So India used to import, but India's exports were very limited at that point of time. So after 1991 economic reforms, Indian economy has been opened for the private investment. Indian economy has been opened for the foreign direct investments. So we used to import things and also export things to other countries as well. So therefore, it has primarily shifted the power from the center to the state governments after 1991 economic reforms. Now, in fact, the economic decision making from the state governments, or from the different stakeholders, it became more and more decentralized. After 1991 economic reforms, the economic decision making, let's understand, before 1991 economic reforms, what happened was the economic decision making was mostly controlled by the central government. So this is very clear for all of us. But after 1991 economic reforms, what happened was there is a clear and a visible shift where the state governments have the power with respect to decision making on the financial matters. They are attracting investments, they are attracting entrepreneurs, they are investing in infrastructure, they are investing in skill development. So therefore there is a clear shift in the financial or economic decision making. So it has become more and more decentralized, and states now also started realizing that attracting investment dependent on the infrastructure. For example, the roads, connectivity, ports, airports, right? So therefore the states now started understanding that infrastructure is very important to attract investment on a large scale. Now, why northeastern states don't attract investment on the same level as the coastal states of India? So for example, the hinterland states, for example, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar. So why those states don't attract investments at par with the coastal states? The reason is infrastructure, the reason is connectivity. And apart from that, good governance is also very, very important. There should be transparency, there should be accountability, and the government should give clearances as quickly as possible to the industry. There should be lesser regulation. So governance also plays a very important role, and apart from that, there needs to be a stability, right? So stable government, stability, and law and order, so everything is important for attracting investment. So now most of the states are trying to attract the investors. So in order to get the investors on board, what they have to do, they have to invest in infrastructure, they have to invest in governance and the political stability, they have to invest in modernizing the law and order management, everything, right? So therefore it has been fundamentally driving India's economic trajectory. And apart from that, the shift has also laid the groundwork for competitive federalism. Now what is competitive federalism? So competitive federalism essentially means that one state is competing with the other state to attract investment, to get more funds and finances from the central government, which is known as competitive federalism, right? So where success arises from competence rather than patronage. Now states are no longer excessively dependent on center for the funds, finances, investment and entrepreneurs. Now the states are competing with each other to attract investments on a large scale, and states are also understood the importance of infrastructure, governance, stability, skill development. So all these factors, so they are also heavily making investments in these areas as well to attract investments on a large scale. So let's understand the emergence of competitive federalism in a country like India. Now we have been discussing the competitive federalism in southern states, particularly Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. So these states have been competing for attracting investments, right? So the author described the competition as a vigorous competition among these states, right? So they have been trying to attract investments from the global technology chains like Google, Micron and Foxconn. Now what will happen if they get investments from these global chains? So they will create large scale employment opportunities. There will be development in the infrastructure, there will be development in the connectivity, and once these companies have established their basis in the respective states, that will provide more and more investments from other companies which are connected with these companies as well. And apart from that, these companies, since the global tech giants, they come up with a large scale investments as well. So that will lead to the economic growth and economic development as well. Now it will also create formal employment opportunities or gainful employment opportunities for the people as well, educated youth. So therefore the states have been creating infrastructure, investing in the skill development of the youth as well. Now in fact, one success story from the Indian state is Gujarat, which is successful in attracting the semiconductor investments, and Telangana's continued push for electric vehicle manufacturing. So this actually reflecting how the regional economies, for example, whether Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, so these are all regional economies, and all these regional economies are they're competing to attract investments, and they have become a strategic players in the global value chains. So how they became strategic players in the global value chains? For example, any tech giant or any semiconductor manufacturing company that comes and invests in a state like Gujarat, we all knew how semiconductors are very, very important for the world technology, right, for the world's electronics. So because of that reason, the regional economies have become the important and strategic players in the global value chains. That factor we should understand. So however, this is no longer a competition for subsidies, but a contest for credibility and the reliability, right? So they wanted to achieve the credibility, so that particular credibility will help them attract investments in a prolonged way, right? So in fact, it is their long-term strategy. to attract investments and to create an impression among the different private players at the global level and at the domestic level that this particular state is a reliable state to invest. What they are doing, they are creating the conducive environment for attracting investors. This conducive environment, so it focuses on both long-term and short-term short-term strategies to attract investors, right? So that's how they are building the credibility and also reliability. For example, when I say long-term strategy, so they are creating infrastructure to improve connectivity. They are creating infrastructure, world-class infrastructure. They are investing in the skill development of people, so adequate skilled workforce is available for these companies. For example, if I say about the short-term measures, so single window clearance, for example, states like Andhra Pradesh, so they have come up with the single window clearance of the approvals for the foreign direct investment within 21 days with less regulations. And another short-term measure would be a land pooling. So land pooling to establish land banks. So that will also help industries to establish the units as quickly as possible, right? So therefore, states have been attracting investors by offering policy predictability. They're showing their strengths to the investors through the Global Investor Summit that most of these states have been conducting, right? So they are offering policy predictability to the investors and efficient administration that they have, and in fact they are also showcasing that the e-governance measures and at the same time the skilled workforce that each of these states have, and in fact the policy predictability, efficient administration and skilled workforce are one of the key components which play a very important role in attracting the investors. However, the true race for the development has turned into a race for the good governance among all these states. Now imagine that if any state have the good governance, so that indicates or that reflects the policy predictability, that reflects efficient administration on the part of the state. So therefore, when these states establishes a good governance framework structures, so that will attract the investors on a large scale, and that will ultimately lead to the development and growth of the states as well. So that's how they are trying to attract the investors. Now let's understand what is the center's role and what is the risks of the rivalry between the states, right? So in this context, we should also understand the role of the central government as well. Now, in fact, the central government played a very important role in this transformation. So what transformation? So the first transformation is after 1991 economic reforms. The states started less depending on the center for the funds, finances, investments. So for all these reasons. And the second transformation is the states have been competing with one another to attract investment. So in order to attract investment, what they have been doing, they have been investing in infrastructure, they have been investing in connectivity, skill development, better administration, policy predictability. So they are doing all these things. So therefore, this is the transformation, and we can say that center has facilitated this transformation by introducing national rankings. For example, ease of doing business, right? So export competitiveness index by Niti Aayog, startup promotion, export readiness. So all these indexes have been started by the central government, and each of these states have been competing with one another to achieve good ranks, to achieve better positions in these rankings. Because if any state has achieved a good ranking, for example, imagine that if any state has achieved a good rank in ease of doing business, then that could be a sweet spot for the investors to come in and invest in those respective states. So therefore, the center has facilitated this transformation and the competitiveness among the states. Now, in fact, the benchmarks have pushed states to innovative, and also refine their investment strategies as well. And in fact, now investors looking at India not as a single entity, but as a federation of opportunities. So investors looking at India, so they have multiple opportunities across different states, and they can invest in any of these states where they enjoy the competitive advantage. Now each state is having their own strength as well. For example, Andhra Pradesh provides a conducive business environment for the investors. Tamil Nadu provides a skilled, or it has a skilled workforce which is required for manufacturing, and Gujarat has a better connectivity, better infrastructure, and Punjab's entrepreneurial energy, and Jharkhand's natural resources. So therefore each state is having a different energy, a different strength or advantage. Now, based on the requirements, investors can look at the better opportunities in all these states, and accordingly, they start investing in any state where they enjoy the competitive advantage. However, now in this context, the competition is good among the states, but this competition has to be managed very carefully, otherwise it will lead to the conflicts between the states as well, and that will not be good for India as a nation. Now, in fact, there is a danger of a race to the bottom, where states offer excessive subsidies or indiscriminate land concessions to attract the industries. Right? So that will not be good. Rather, the competition among the states is good. Right? But while offering concessions, while offering subsidies to attract investors, the states should also look at the condition, the geographical condition, the administrative factors, political factors, social factors, economic factors. So all these factors should kept in mind, rather than blindly giving subsidies, concessions to the investors to attract large scale investments. So otherwise it will lead to the detriment of the states. Now, in fact, the smarter path lies in competing through competence, not concessions. Don't give excessive concessions to the states. It is good to compete with other states because it will help you attract investments. It will also help you invest in human resources development. But don't give too much concessions to the private investors, because if you give too much concessions to the private investors, you may not be able to get adequate funds. Those funds you can use for the welfare expenditure. So therefore, sustainable competition depends on transparency, fiscal prudence, and the institutional strength of the respective state governments. So I hope you have understood this article. And next, discuss a very important topic. Recently, the World Health Organization has published a report. And this report has indicated that the tuberculosis incidence is reducing in India by 21% a year. Now, in fact, this is a very good news for India, because India is a country with the largest global TB burden. So therefore, let's discuss this topic in detail. We'll understand what is tuberculosis and what it means for India. What are the initiatives that India has launched to fight TB? Now, this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this is important for general studies paper 2. So let's discuss about TB. So first of all, we'll understand what is tuberculosis and then how it spreads. Now, tuberculosis is a bacterial disease. Now, apart from bacterial disease, it is also a contagious airborne disease. Now, contagious disease is a disease which easily spread from one individual to another individual. Now, in fact, it is caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So, Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria causes TB disease. Now, in fact, TB mostly affect lungs, and it can also impact other body parts as well. So I hope you have understood what is TB. So let's understand how TB spreads from one individual to another individual. Now, in fact, TB spreads through air droplets, right? So with individual lung, a TB cough, right, and a sneeze, split, or releasing infectious droplets, right? So, this could easily spread from one individual who is already infected with the TB to another individual if they have contact with the infectious droplets, cough, sneeze. So all these things, it could easily spread. However, tuberculosis is a curable and a preventable disease, but it requires a long-term medication, a long-term treatment. So that's the problem. So since it is a prolonged disease, it requires long-term medication, long-term treatment. So most of the people cannot afford long-term treatment in India. So what happens in midway, they stop treatment and medication. So that leads to TB developing resistance. So when TB develops resistance, it's very difficult to fight tuberculosis. And that's why India is a country with the largest population, also have the burden of largest TB cases. So let's understand the report published by the World Health Organization with respect to tuberculosis. And it shows that India remains the country with the highest TB burden in the world. So that means around 25% of the global TB cases are reported in India, despite achieving a 21% reduction in incidence of TB since 2015. Right? So this is the good news. Since we are the country with the largest TB burden, highest TB burden in the world, India is fighting TB, and that has been yielding results is certainly a good news. And in fact, this report is published by the World Health Organization. Right? So in fact, this is an annual assessment of tuberculosis trends across the world, and it deals with the prevention, diagnosis, treatment at the global level, regional level, and the national level as well. Now, what is the aim of Global Tuberculosis Report of 2025? So the objective and aim of the Global Tuberculosis Report is to track progress towards End TB strategy. Now, End TB strategy was launched in the year 2015, and it aimed to end TB worldwide by the year 2035, which actually targets a 90% reduction in global TB deaths and 80% reduction in incidence by 2030, and guide evidence-based national TB control policies. Right? So this is the aim and objective of the Global Tuberculosis Report of 2025. Now let's understand global TB trends. Now if you look at the global TB trends first, the TB incidence is declined by 1.7%, right? So from 2023 to 2024, it has just declined 1.7%, right? So that means, so around 131 cases are reported for 1 lakh population, and in fact reversing pandemic related setbacks. Right? For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we faced certain setbacks. So certain setbacks in the sense that we used to have a higher cases reported for 1 lakh cases during the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has further aggravated the situation during the COVID-19. Right? Because of the poor medical health facilities or inadequate infrastructure, what happened was the burden of TB cases has further increased, but now we are on a track to achieve the goals to reduce a TB burden worldwide. Now in fact, the decline of TB cases continued in African countries, Southeast Asian countries, East Mediterranean countries, and European regions. However, America saw the 4th consecutive rise due to the under detection. Now, if any individual have TB, who is infected with TB, so if he is not detected with the TB, then what happens that this individual will freely roam outside, and there is a chance of this disease spreading to other healthy individuals as well, since it is a contagious disease. So if it is not detected early, then there is a chance of higher contamination or higher number of individuals being infected with the TB as well. Now if you look at the data with respect to the TB burden, so Southeast Asia accounted for 34% of TB cases, Western Pacific accounts for 27%, Africa accounts for 25% of the global TB cases around the world. However, As of now, just 8 countries have the global TB burden of 67%. Right, so 67% of the global TB cases are reported from just 8 countries, and among the 8 countries, India is in the first place. Right, so around 25% of the global TB cases are reported from India alone. So Indonesia 10% and Philippines 6.8%. However, the global multi-drug resistant TB, because the TB bacteria has also started developing resistance as well, because the individuals who are infected with the TB stopped medication or treatment, since it is a long-term treatment, long-term medication in nature. So the multi-drug resistant TB remains a major threat, because we cannot easily fight with the multi-drug resistant TB, right? So that is a very important to get the long-term medication and treatment if any individual is infected with the TB. Now, in fact, the international TB financing has stagnated since 2020. Now, financing is also very important. There are several developing countries, underdeveloped countries, least developed island nations. So without funding, so they cannot fight TB, because most of these countries are poor countries. They have the priorities, right? So fighting TB may not be a priority. So therefore, it is very important that at the international level, a TB financing should be provided to all poor and developing countries. So that will help these countries better fight TB disease and its spread. So let's understand the TB trends in India. So what are the trends of tuberculosis in India? Now, in fact, in India, TB incidence has reduced from 195 in the year 2023 to 187. So this is just a minor reduction in the number of TB cases. So in 2023, 195 cases were reported to 1 lakh population, but in 2024 it is 187 people for 1 lakh population. Right, so therefore it has been indicating that 27% reduction since 2015 levels compared to the global decline of just 12%. So from 2015 the global decline is just 12%, but India's decline is 21%, and it is a remarkable achievement for India with respect to its fight against tuberculosis. Now, India diagnosed 2.61 million of an estimated 2.7 million cases in 2024, and this is there are sharply reducing missing cases gap, right? So in fact, TB deaths also dropped from 28 in 2015 to just 21 per 1 lakh people in 2024. So there is a significant decline in number of TB deaths as well. So however, though it is still above the target of a 3 per 1 lakh population by 2025. Right. So apart from that, India accounted for 32% of the global multi-drug resistant TB cases, though incidence is gradually declining. Now, despite a significant success, a significant achievement on the part of India to fight against the TB disease, it is very, very important that India needs to act swiftly to deal with the multi-drug resistant TB as well. Now, in order to fight TB, Government of India has launched Nikshay 2.0 and TB Mukt Bharat initiatives. So these initiatives have increased the coverage of people who are already infected with the TB and expanded the upfront molecular diagnostics as well. So early diagnostics, treatment, regular tracking, monitoring. So it is very, very important to deal with TB or to fight against TB. So however, let's understand the other important factors as well with respect to tuberculosis disease, right? So if we talk about the other important factors about the tuberculosis, so we need to talk about the challenges, right? So with respect to the challenges in dealing with the tuberculosis, so lack of the healthcare facilities or lack of infrastructure, lack of healthcare professionals who are dealt to deal with TB is the major challenge. And apart from that, most of the primary healthcare centers that we have, these primary healthcare centers lacked the necessary infrastructure for the diagnostics. So we have ASHA workers and we have accredited ANM activists, right? So therefore early diagnostics of the people who are infected with the TB and regular medication, regular treatment has to be provided. Now we have already understood that the government has launched programs like Nikshay 2.0 and also TB Mukt Bharat initiative as well, right? So therefore the government has to utilize the funding in a better way to deal with the tuberculosis. So multi-drug resistant is also another major problem. The government should emphasize on research and development to deal with the multi-drug resistant, along with creating large-scale awareness among the people about the TB disease, which is very important. So that will help fight the multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And in fact there is a need to provide a large scale infrastructure and at the same time a decentralization or a decentralized planning for diagnostic treatment monitoring of TB cases is very important. And apart from that, regularly coordinating with the different governments at the different level, which is also very important to fight against the tuberculosis disease. Now in this context, international cooperation is also very important aspect, right? So for example, cooperating with World Health Organization, cooperating with the developed countries which have already achieved the required level of technology or any other best practices which help us deal with the tuberculosis in a better manner. For example, community participation, right, or community management. So those things have to be brought in. So they are the best practices. If those best practices have been followed elsewhere in the world and they are giving good results, and those best practices should be applied to India as well with certain modifications and exceptions. And cooperating with the pharma companies is also very important, and regular R&D also plays a very important role dealing with the tuberculosis. And apart from that, the other important topic is, we all knew that recently an explosion took place at Red Fort in Delhi. Now in fact the center has recently classified this as a terrorist attack. So in fact the investigation has also been taking place, and in fact it is after a long time that we have been experiencing a terrorist attack in the national capital. So therefore the center has started involving all other agencies such as National Investigation Agency and all other anti-terror agencies to investigate this matter throughout India, right? So we'll discuss that in detail in our later lectures. And thank you so much, and that's all for today. So please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like our video. Thank you.